Hello and welcome back. This is ProTaleDev back with another Dungeon Architect video. It's actually been about 2 weeks since I last recorded, and so we've got a lot of things to cover. To get started, what I'm going to do is I'm going to wait for a new disaster. So what I've done is I've looked at some of the disasters that we have, and currently we only had 2 disasters. One of them was mostly finished, which was the floods, and then the monster escape, the raid. That was partially done, but needed more monsters. Now what I've done is I've added in a bunch more disasters just to kind of fill in the gaps. So specifically I've added forest fires, social unrest, and anti-production. So the names kind of give it away. So we've got the forest fires, which will set one of these sceneries on fire and destroy the tile. We've also got the social unrest, which will slow the amount of people that come into the island. And then we've got the anti-production, which protest, which is slowing down the production of materials. With those disasters, we also have new icons as well. We also have a planned earthquake disaster as well. In fact, what I'll do is I'll actually show the icons now. Really, the gameplay is very, very straightforward. It doesn't get altered too much. So if I just go into sprites here and then try and find our icons. Okay, and here we got our disaster icons. Now if I quickly open them right here, you can see them. These are our standard ones. So we have our monster raids, our floods, with our different skulls, which indicate the difficulty of these, the danger level. Then we have the anti-production and the forest fires. And then we have down here the unrest, social unrest, and the earthquakes. So these are going to have different effects. This is all I've got planned so far. But like I mentioned, this one destroys tiles, specifically scenery tiles. This one slows down the rate of production. This one, earthquake, is actually going to, I haven't completely decided, but I'm thinking either to lift certain paths up so it blocks certain terrain, so players are going to have to build around or multiple ways to get to a specific place, or if it's going to actually destroy buildings, maybe depending on the difficulty. And then yeah, the social unrest is simple. It's just going to be less people arriving in the island. Okay, so they're the new icons, and that's really the new disasters in there. Really, the only one is the forest fires. That has really got a visual effect, apart from the icon at the bottom that'll appear. If I quickly just pause this, what happens here is inside of a scenery, we have down here what's called the scenery attribute script. This just controls if a disaster has occurred. It sets a bool active, which is on fire, turns on, and then after a certain amount of time, the scenery is actually destroyed. And obviously the fire is then gone. We can always enhance this script so that it can detect other sceneries next to it and then potentially spread fire to them, but I haven't done that yet. For now I'm just keeping it simple. So what we're going to do is we're just going to quickly turn the fire on, just to show you what it looks like. You can see there that the fire is pretty straightforward. Next, what I want to show is actually the new lava shader. So it's pretty similar to the water, simply because lava I find looks very similar in that way to the like shimmery water that we've got. So it's just a standard shader, but it does have some minor changes to it, from the color to the patterns and waves, things like that. It does have minor changes to it. And then if we check it in the game itself, I do actually have it put down here. So as you can see, this is what it looks like. You see it's slightly moving, it's a little bit slower than the water, looks a lot more lava. It does have emission on, so it's producing a little bit of light, yellow light, or should I say orange light, just to add to that lava feel to it. And it is in my materials. Let me quickly go to it. But we do have our shader right here where we can edit all of our attributes, all of our values, and edit what we need. The next thing is the dungeon. Now, as you can see right here, I actually have a castle active for this very reason. just while I was experimenting. And of course this is just a small grid, a small dungeon grid that we have placed down here, and it's very straightforward. It's just a bit of land with a starter room placed in it. Now there was a lot of problems that I had to go through. There was a lot of issues that I had, and this took a very long time to make this dungeon into 3D, much longer than it did for the buildings that I have in the overworld and turning that into 3D. This one took way longer. I had a lot of issues with the placement and the grids, but it's finished, it's done, it's working, and that's all that really matters. So I guess the first thing to talk about really about this dungeon is the fact that I've now got, up here we've got ProTaleDev. ProTaleDev allows us to edit our own meshes, simple based low poly meshes, and create our own shapes. This is exactly what I want for this type of game, which is low poly anyway. I kind of wanted something that where I could create a little bit of land that's a little bit more natural in a way, rather than just a simple block. And this allowed me to do it very quickly. I'm also going to use it for other things that are environment related, so I might create some flowers for it, some other stuff, and so that's going to be very helpful. Like I mentioned, this block down here, this ground, is actually from the ProTaleDev. It's just a cube set up. It essentially works the same way as normal ground does, and you can just build on it as you would. However, there is another thing, which is that this ground doesn't actually have any physical collider. This ground doesn't have a physical collider because it's more visual than anything else, and that's because you won't be able to run around on this outside section. This is just a buildable area. Inside the dungeon is where you're going to be running around, so the ground is actually these tiles right in there. But we do have a buildable area that is sort of its own little grid. So if I just press this, you can actually see it. It's inside of this section, so this is where you're going to be able to place the objects. Might even bring it in a little bit more, and that's just going to determine, because it's very flat, it's going to determine where you can place it, and it'll all be flat as well, so it'll all connect correctly. So the next thing is I do want to show the dungeon itself. So if I just quickly press play here and I go into our dungeon, you'll see right here that we got our starter room, which is what it gives us, and then we got a little bit of area to build in. Now of course we can go to our shop as usual, and then we have our new custom blueprints. Again, getting all this working was a bit of a pain, but it's done now, and so we can place these down wherever we like, as long as it connects to our connector points. We can have different kind of rooms, and we can have our different kind of connectors. So I haven't actually finished the traps, because we actually have a few more traps that we can work with now. We also have the lighting crystals, which I haven't done the lighting, obstacles, and of course the monsters. While they are now in the game, which I'll show them in a minute, they haven't been put into the shop yet. So let's put a few examples down. Let's pause it, and let's add in a bunch of gold. Okay, so now we have a bunch of gold. We do have our grid on top of another grid. That's just because that's just to line up the mesh is snap point with the snap point of this grid. It made it easier for me to build on. I'm actually going to remove the grid on the ground on the mesh, which is connected to the Unreal presets for the grid. I'll get rid of that so that it's just a blank ground. And what I'll do is I'll just leave this other grid on here, most likely a little bit lower towards the ground as well. So what we can do is we can connect this, and there we go, we've got it connected. Now they're slightly disconnected on the middle section, on this section right here, and around the edges of all of these rooms they're slightly disconnected. That is intentional. I've actually disconnected them intentionally just so I can see where the points exactly meet. It's just really for testing and for making sure things connect properly, and it's really just for background things. They will be connected up and extended very slightly to connect together later on. So let's add in a few more buildings. So we can add in a small room right here. So remember, this is also a small area, so it's actually not really big enough for us to put medium rooms down, or a lot of medium rooms down. But what we could do is we could put some down. Now you can see here that it does go over the edge. That's okay as well, because what we're going to do is you won't be able to build beyond that anyway, and so these will just cut off. So if we do put this down here, and we got this room right there, we can also put down, let's say, another room. Whoops, so another bug. Now my hope is to have another connector which is much smaller, just as like a diagonal piece. Like a miniature Z, like what we got here. We've got a large room, or a small room in this case, which is a Z. I want to kind of have a connector which is the same, just to make it easier to connect points to each other, because right now we got the same issue. Ideally, we want also a small miniature turning point as well, and you'll notice right here we have a small piece that we should be able to fit in here. Obviously now the horizontal isn't just one block, it's 3, so now it can't be fit in here. We have to be much more careful with what we're trying to connect into. Now we got a little bit of a dungeon right here, so what we're going to do is we're actually going to go into our player version. So we're actually going to go into the adventure. Oh, and of course everything's flooded, because right now there's a disaster going on. Now if there is a disaster going on and you're inside the dungeon, what you're going to actually have to do is immediately evacuate. What will happen is you'll get like a little bit of a timer happening that'll force you out. Of course, if this disaster will basically force you out of the dungeon. The disasters are happening quite often, but they won't actually happen that often in the actual game. This is again just for testing, but they'll happen very often so basically they won't happen very often, so the player doesn't have to worry about them too much. Now what we're going to do is we're going to go into our adventure, and then as you can see we can move around. Now my player is spawning underneath, but that's okay, because what I'm going to do is I'm just going to quickly cheat a little bit. Okay, and what we got here now is we've got our player that can move around. Now you can see that these locks that have appeared unintentionally. Basically what's happening is that they're spawning too high, they're not hitting the connectors to detect if they're working, if they're connected to another room, and so they're just coming out as a false connection, and so it's throwing these locks. These locks are also spawning really high, and that's because of somehow some of the rooms have been placed. Okay, now that we're out of that, what we're going to be doing is quickly showing the blueprints and what they look like. So just to give you an idea of how long this took. So we have our basic starter area right here, surrounded by lava, and then we have our actual objects. So we have our rooms here, which are very basic. They're modeled after the dungeon farm tycoon rooms, but obviously in 3D. And then we have our medium, which is our bigger rooms. They're all very straightforward, but the whole point is that you'll decorate them yourself, or have maybe an option to auto decorate. Not sure yet. And then we have, if we go into our large, we have our very big rooms, which are very likely going to spawn really big bosses. We have our cross section here and our diamond. And then we have the same thing in our icons. So same way we did our other objects in the overworld, in the on the island, where they have a blueprint system, we have the same thing now for all of these. So you can see that we have our walls, which are standard white transparent material, but we actually have a bottom here which is not, it's actually a grey transparent, just to add a little bit of difference to it, to show the floor. So we can have a look at these. We can see them in our medium, and we also have our connectors which do the same as well. So our connectors also have this connection. Our deadline was initially to complete all the dungeons, convert everything to 3D and have it working as it would be on the 2D version. By the time we hit the end of March, we're pretty much at the end of March, but I do have most things now set up. You know, all the placement, all of the different stats, the 3D environment on the basic island. We have all of our disasters in, although some of them not really working yet. We have our shaders and things like that. Our big thing is the placement, and also we have our monsters now in. Now that brings us to our next thing. Our next and very last thing, which I want to talk about, is the monsters. And go to our render and models. You'll see that we actually have all of our monsters in here. And the easiest way to show you these is actually down here, because I've actually been animating them as well. Well, specifically, I've added one animation to them, which is an idle animation. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to quickly show them very briefly. You can see straight away, this is our young devil. What he does when he's idle is he just moves a little slightly, moves his arms, and then moves his head a little bit up and down. This is just a very basic animation. It's just playing one animation. We're going to have an attack, a movement, and then potentially an attack animation as well for all of these. But for now, that's what we got for this guy. The next is this guy right here. Remember, these are all idle, so they won't be doing anything. So this guy's just looking around, bending around, and then kind of doing a bit of slow movement. This guy shakes his top section of his head and slight movement in the bottom as well. But it's very, very straightforward, very still. Right here. Oh, I'll also mention the name. So this is the Flesh Devil, Young Devil, and this is the Prime Devil, the worst one. Then right here we have the Shaman. So the Goblin Shaman, he has his wooden staff, which is slowly moving, and he does have slight movement with his head and the mask. Again, this is another one that's a little bit subtle, but you'll see that he has the spike trap right here. He's slowly moving it, and he's also moving his head as well, and he's also breathing in and out slightly. You see his slight movement on his chest. So that was the Trapper, and this guy we have the Mud Monster. Again, all of these names can easily be changed in the game themselves. These are just the basic names that I have for everything. So we have the Mud Monster right here, which is looking around. He has sort of this little stretchy neck that's pulled forward, and he does sort of breathe in and breathe out. So he scales up and scales down, extends. Then we have the Green Slime, which is exactly what you would expect from a slime. He's sort of being a bit more stretchy, flexible. He's pulling up, pulling down. He's sort of acting like a slinky a little bit, so he's sort of compressing and then extending, and that's his basic movement. He's also doing it from the back section a tiny bit as well. So next we have the Skullwalker, which has a slight head tilt, really basic. Next we have the Water Drop, which I'm not 100% happy with its idle animation. It's kind of a little boring and a little bit weird. It doesn't really work to the animation that I have intended for when it moves and attacks. So I might change this guy to be a bit more fluent, more ghostly, more wavy. Next we have the Thin Bone, which is his head moving, sort of wobbling, sort of like a little bit more downwards, almost like a sad feel to it. We also have the tail moving slightly and the foot moving slightly as well. Next we have one of my more interesting ones, which is the Stone Golem. So you can see that his hands move ever so slightly, but it's really this section, the core, which, as you can see with its pulsation, it kind of reminds you of a heart, and this is its core, so I kind of went with that idea. So you can see it's moving around, it's floating around the center, and then it's sort of beating ever so slightly. Next we have the Orc Brute. Now it's a little bit broken. The rig didn't come out as well as I thought. I thought I'd completed it and checked it over, but obviously I missed some parts where it's been rigged, so I've kind of just got a basic look for it at the moment. It's probably going to need to be rigged again, and the paint weights need to be done again. And so what we've got here is a slight bit of nod and its arms moving, and that's basically it. It does breathe in and out as well. Then we have the Orc Fighter, which was rigged very well, works pretty well. We have it with a spear, which came with the Dungeon Trapper Dungeon Trap pack, which I downloaded. I already used that last time in a previous project. Obviously it will go in the credits of my game. As you can see right here, all he's doing is waving his spear. and just standing still. He is breathing in slightly and nodding his head very slightly. Next we have the Dark Mage, who's slightly moving, expanding up and down a little bit, very straightforward. Next we have the Vine, which is moving left to right. This is the Giant Vine, the Monster Vine, which is kind of parented with this. Next we have this, which is moving slightly up. This is more of its battle ready, and this is most likely going to be one of the bosses. It's actually just going to be compressed the entire time when it's idle, and then when you get close to it, it's going to expand like this, start a fight, maybe lock you in to the room you're in. Next we have our Phaser Ringer, and this guy is going to be just kind of standing still with its rings rotating. Nothing much to it. His vines are moving ever so slightly, but there's nothing more he's going to be doing until he's chasing you or attacking you. Then we have our Phaser Eye, which is just our observer. It's kind of just moving its vines at the top left, and then it's got this main body. I also brought in our Creep Spider. However, it's not animated yet. I'm not even sure if I'll keep it. It's just to add into the monsters that I've done. I'm not sure if I'll keep it yet. I might get rid of it. Okay, so that's everything I've got so far. There was a lot to cover. It's been over 2 weeks after all, so there was a lot of things to cover in this game. Next video will most likely be about weapons. It'll be the weapons. Also, we'll have the dungeon stuff fixed. Hopefully it'll all be ready, and maybe the medium and large one will be ready as well. Okay, so this has been ProTaleDev, and I'll see you next time.